The police told me my wife had died in a crash at 11:38 on a Tuesday night. By 1:10 in the morning, I was standing beneath the fluorescent lights of a county hospital, staring through a glass window at a woman who had my wife's driver's license in her purse, my wife's wedding ring on her hand, and my wife's car wrapped around a concrete barrier. But the woman on the table was not my wife. I knew before the nurse pulled back the sheet completely. Her hair was the same dark brown. Her height looked close. Even the small gold ring on her left hand was identical to the one I had given Natalie 17 years earlier. But Natalie had a pale scar under her chin from falling off a bicycle when she was 12. This woman did not. I stepped closer to the glass. That isn't her. The detective beside me did not answer immediately. He was a tired-looking man named Aaron Pike. His tie was loose, and he held a paper cup of coffee he had not touched since we entered the room. "Mr. Hale," he said carefully, "the identification was found in the vehicle. I don't care. The car is registered to your wife. That still isn't her." He looked at the nurse, then back at me. "Are you certain?" I turned toward him. "I've been married to her for 17 years. The words came out sharper than I intended. The nurse lowered the sheet. Detective Pike asked me to sit down. I did not. My legs were shaking, but sitting felt like agreeing to something. 40 minutes earlier, I had been asleep on the couch in our house outside Sacramento. Natalie had texted around 7 saying she was staying late at the rehabilitation center where she worked. She was an occupational therapist. Late nights happened, though not often. I had answered with a picture of the soup I made for dinner and the message, "I saved you a bowl." She never replied. At 10:52, I left her a voicemail. "You could have called. I'm going to bed. Soup's in the fridge." That voicemail was still sitting unanswered on my phone when the police knocked on my door. The voicemail became the thing I kept returning to. Not the wrecked car. Not the sheet in the hospital. My own voice saying soup was in the fridge, as if the night still belonged to an ordinary marriage. Detective Pike led me into a small consultation room. The walls were beige. A box of tissues sat in the center of the table, too deliberately placed. He asked when I had last seen Natalie. That morning. She had been standing in the kitchen in dark blue scrubs, drinking coffee from a chipped white mug that said Lake Tahoe across the front. We bought it on our 10th anniversary. She complained that I had used the last of the cream, kissed me near the front door, and reminded me that our daughter, Sophie, needed a ride home from rehearsal on Friday. Nothing about her seemed final. Nothing about her seemed borrowed. "Was your wife having problems with anyone?" the detective asked. "No." "Did she ever lend her car to friends or coworkers?" "Not that I know of." "Was the ring definitely hers?" I thought about it. Natalie's wedding ring had a tiny scratch along the lower edge. She had caught it on a metal cabinet at work 5 years earlier and refused to have it polished out. The ring on the dead woman's hand had looked scratched. Maybe it was Natalie's. Maybe I had imagined it. I need to see it again. Detective Pike said that would have to wait. Then he asked if Natalie owned another phone. No. Another vehicle? No. Did she travel frequently? Sometimes for conferences. He wrote something down. The questions changed the room. At first, I was a husband identifying the wrong body. 10 minutes later, I felt like a man being shown the blank spaces inside his own marriage. At 2:17 in the morning, the detective received a call and stepped into the hallway. I heard only fragments. Not the same prints. "No," husband confirmed. "Run the plate history again." He returned and closed the door. The deceased woman's fingerprints do not match the prints on file for your wife's professional license. For the first time that night, the air reached my lungs properly. So Natalie's alive? We don't know that. But that woman isn't her. No, he said. She isn't. Relief should have come. Instead, fear changed shape. If Natalie was alive, where was she? And why had another woman died wearing her ring and carrying her identification? Detective Pike asked me to call Natalie again. I did. Straight to voicemail. I called the rehabilitation center. A night supervisor answered after several rings. She knew my name. Natalie left early, she said. What time? Around 5:30. She told me she was working late. The woman hesitated. I'm sorry. She wasn't scheduled late tonight. I thanked her and hung up. That was the first crack. Small, clean, undeniable. Natalie had not been at work. Detective Pike asked whether I wanted him to send someone to our house. I said yes. Then I called Sophie. She was 21 and lived 40 minutes away near her university. I did not tell her about the body. I told her mom was missing and that the police were helping. She was quiet for several seconds. Then she said, "Did she go to Auburn?" The detective looked up. I asked Sophie what she meant. She's been going there on Thursdays. Natalie told me she had therapy appointments on Thursdays. She said that? Sophie's voice changed. 3 weeks earlier, she had seen Natalie outside a small apartment complex in Auburn. Sophie had been riding with a friend and almost called out to her, but Natalie was carrying grocery bags and walking beside a teenage girl, a girl around 15. Sophie assumed she was a patient's daughter. Did Mom see you? I asked. No. What did the girl look like? I don't know. Dark hair, taller than me. She was wearing a red jacket. Detective Pike wrote everything down. I ended the call after promising Sophie I would contact her as soon as I knew more. The detective asked whether Natalie had family in Auburn. No. Friends? Not that she ever mentioned. He leaned back in his chair. Would your wife have any reason to spend time with a teenage girl without telling you? I almost said no. Then I remembered the graduation photograph. It had arrived in our mailbox 6 months earlier in a plain white envelope with no return address. The girl in the picture had dark hair, a serious expression, and a red honor cord around her neck. On the back, someone had written, "She still has your eyes." I had assumed it was meant for a neighbor. Natalie took the photograph from my hand too quickly. "Wrong address," she said. Then she tore it in half and dropped it into the kitchen trash. At the time, I noticed her hands were shaking. I did not ask why. That was the kind of husband I had become near the end, without realizing there was an end. I noticed things and accepted explanations, because questioning them seemed more dangerous than believing them. At 4:05, an officer called from our house. Natalie's passport was missing. So was a small suitcase, 3 months of medication, and the cash we kept in a ceramic jar above the refrigerator. Her Lake Tahoe mug was still beside the sink. The soup I had saved for her was untouched in the refrigerator. But her spare house key was gone from the hook by the door. The key had a yellow plastic cover. Natalie always called it the ugly key because it did not match the others. I pictured it in her hand. A key meant she expected to return, or wanted someone to believe she would. Just before sunrise, Detective Pike drove me home. There was police tape around Natalie's car space, even though the car itself was 70 miles away in an evidence lot. The empty rectangle of concrete looked strangely deliberate. Inside, everything seemed normal. her shoes beneath the bench, her coat on the hook, a grocery list attached to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a lemon, milk, onions, dog food, coffee. I stood in the kitchen staring at that list while the detective checked the rooms. Then he called my name from upstairs. Natalie's side of the bedroom closet looked full at first, but the clothes at the front had been arranged to hide the empty space behind them. At the back of the closet was a loose floorboard. Under it, Detective Pike found a metal cash box. Inside were 2 birth certificates. One belonged to Sophie. The other belonged to a girl named Lila Marin Hale, born 16 years earlier in Reno, Nevada. Mother, Natalie Marie Hale. The father's name was blank. I read the document twice. Then I looked at the detective. We only have one daughter. He did not correct me. He did not need to. Under the birth certificate was a photograph of Natalie holding a newborn in a hospital bed. She looked younger, tired, terrified. On the back, in Natalie's handwriting, were 6 words. I'm sorry I let them take you. I sat on the edge of the bed with the photograph in my hand. The woman in the crash was not my wife. My wife was missing. And somewhere in Auburn, there was a 16-year-old girl who carried my last name and had apparently existed inside my marriage for years without me knowing. I thought that was the secret Natalie had run to protect. I was wrong. The birth certificate explained the girl. It did not explain the dead woman wearing Natalie's ring. By 8:30 that morning, Detective Pike had the birth certificate, the photograph, and the name of the apartment complex in Auburn. I had the Lake Tahoe mug in both hands. The coffee inside it had gone cold. Pike stood near the kitchen window, speaking quietly into his phone. I could hear him giving Lila's name, date of birth, and the Reno hospital listed on the certificate. I stared at the empty hook where the yellow house key used to hang. Natalie had taken it. That bothered me more than it should have. People take passports when they plan to disappear. They take cash, medication, clothes. A spare key meant something else. It meant she had left a door open in her mind. Pike ended the call. The birth certificate appears legitimate, he said. We're waiting for records from Nevada. So she had a child. It looks that way. While we were married? He glanced down at the document. Lila had been born 16 years earlier. Natalie and I had been married 17. Yes. The word sat between us. I did the math again, even though it had not changed. The first year of our marriage had been difficult. Natalie's mother, Carol, had been sick. Natalie traveled to Reno several times to help her. She stayed for weeks once, telling me Carol had complications after surgery. I remembered sleeping alone in our first apartment, eating canned soup over the sink because we had not bought a table yet. I remembered Natalie coming home thinner, pale, and strangely quiet. She told me grief had changed her. I believed her because her mother died 3 months later. Now I wondered which grief she had meant. My phone rang. Sophie. I stepped into the living room before answering. Did you find Mom? Not yet. She was quiet. Then she said, You're not telling me something. I sat on the arm of the couch. There was no good way to say it. No gentle version that would not become another lie. We found a birth certificate. For who? A girl named Lila. Another pause. How old? 16. Sophie breathed out slowly. Mom's daughter? Yes. The word felt worse the second time. Sophie did not cry. She asked practical questions instead. Did Dad know? Was Lila safe? Was she the girl in Auburn? Had Mom been seeing her? I answered what I could. Then Sophie asked the question I had been avoiding. Is she your daughter too? I don't know. It was the honest answer. It was also the cruelest one. After the call, I found Pike in the hallway looking at the photograph again. Can we go to Auburn? I asked. He shook his head. Officers are already there. You should stay here in case Natalie contacts you. She hasn't answered all night. That doesn't mean she won't. He handed me the photograph. Do you recognize the hospital room? No. The blanket? I looked closer. The newborn was wrapped in a white blanket with pale green stripes. Natalie's hair was damp against her face. Her left hand rested near the baby's head. She was not wearing her wedding ring. I had never noticed that before. At 9:12, Pike's phone rang. He listened for less than a minute. Then his expression tightened. The apartment is empty. My stomach dropped. Empty how? No people. No furniture except a mattress, a table, and 2 chairs. Food in the refrigerator. Clothes in the closet. Looks like someone left recently. Lila? Possibly. Were Natalie's things there? He hesitated. They found mail addressed to her. The room shifted again. Not visits. Not secret meetings. A second address. Pike told me the lease was in the name of a woman called Marianne Vale. That name meant nothing to me. Then he showed me a photograph an officer had sent. The lease application included a photocopy of Marianne's driver's license. The woman in the photograph was the woman from the crash. I sat down. The dead woman had rented the apartment where Natalie's hidden daughter lived. She had carried Natalie's identification. She had worn Natalie's ring, and Natalie had disappeared the same night she died. Who was she? I asked. We're working on that. You think Natalie killed her? Pike looked at me directly. I did not say that. You're thinking it. I'm thinking the circumstances are serious. He did not soften it. I respected him for that. At 10:05, I received a voicemail from a blocked number. Pike made me play it on speaker. For 3 seconds, there was only breathing. Then a girl's voice said, "Mr. Hale, please stop looking for us." The message ended. I stared at the phone. Pike asked me to play it again. The voice was young, controlled, but frightened underneath. Lila? I asked. Maybe. Then another message came through, this time as text. Natalie did not hurt Marianne. She was trying to help her. Pike took photographs of the screen. I typed before he could stop me. Where is my wife? The reply came almost immediately. She is doing what she should have done 16 years ago. Then the number went dead. For the first time, anger pushed through the fear. I had spent the night thinking Natalie was dead. Then I learned she had another daughter. Now a stranger, or my wife's daughter, was telling me to stop asking questions as if I were the danger. I called the number back anyway. Disconnected. Pike told me not to send anything else. I stood up and started pacing. What does that mean? What should she have done 16 years ago? We need more records. I need my wife. I understand. No, you don't. The words came out louder than I intended. Pike let them. He did not argue. At 11:40, the Reno hospital returned the records request. Lila had been born prematurely. Natalie was listed as the mother. There was no father on the official birth record, but there was another name in the social worker's notes. A man named Andrew Marin. I knew that name. Not personally. But I had seen it once, years earlier, on an envelope Natalie burned in our backyard. When I asked about it, she said it was junk mail from someone she used to know. The social worker's report said Andrew was 28 at the time. Natalie had been 24. It also said there had been concerns about coercion, housing instability, and pressure from maternal family to place the infant privately. Privately. Not through an adoption agency, not through the state. The report ended with one unfinished sentence. Mother became distressed when informed that infant had been released to. The rest of the page was missing. Pike asked if Natalie's mother had been involved. I don't know. But I remembered Carol. The way she controlled every room without raising her voice. The way Natalie still went quiet when her name came up, even years after the funeral. Carol had never liked me. She said I was too ordinary for Natalie. She believed marriage had trapped her daughter before she had lived enough. I had thought it was arrogance. Now I wondered if it had been fear. At noon, Sophie arrived without warning. She walked into the house, saw the police car outside, and dropped her bag near the door. "I'm not leaving," she said. I did not argue. She looked at the photograph of Natalie holding the baby. Then she sat beside me at the table. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, Sophie said, "I think I've seen her before." "Lila?" She nodded. "Last Christmas." My head turned toward her. "At Grandma Carol's storage unit." Carol's belongings had been moved into storage after her death. Natalie told me she had finally emptied it last December. Sophie had helped. She said a teenage girl arrived halfway through the afternoon. Natalie introduced her as the daughter of an old family friend. The girl stayed outside most of the time, holding a red jacket over one arm. Before she left, she hugged Natalie. Not politely, not like a family friend, like someone holding on after waiting too long. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. Sophie looked at me. "Because Mom asked me not to." The answer hurt because it sounded familiar. Natalie had not built her secret life alone. She had built it out of small silences borrowed from everyone who loved her. Pike's phone rang again. This time he stepped away from us. When he returned, his face had changed. We identified Marianne Vale. He placed a photograph on the table. She was 42, a licensed practical nurse from Reno. No criminal history, no spouse, no children. She had worked in the maternity ward at the hospital where Lila was born. My mouth went dry. Pike continued. Marianne had resigned 3 days after Lila's birth. Then she disappeared from Nevada for almost a year. Sophie looked at me. I looked at the woman in the photograph. The woman who died in Natalie's car. The woman wearing Natalie's ring. The woman who had rented an apartment for Lila. "She took the baby," I said. Pike did not answer. He did not need to. At 1:26, a package arrived at our front door. No return address. Inside was the yellow house key, Natalie's spare key. Wrapped around it was a hospital bracelet, faded with age. The name printed on it was not Lila's. It was Natalie's. And beneath the bracelet was a note in my wife's handwriting. I did not abandon her. They made me believe she was dead. I read the note 3 times before I understood a single sentence. I did not abandon her. They made me believe she was dead. The handwriting was unmistakably Natalie's. The loops in the letters. The way she crossed every T too far to the right. The tiny dot she always placed inside the loop of her lowercase g. It was hers. Sophie stood beside me, staring at the hospital bracelet wrapped around the yellow house key. "Is that Mom's?" I nodded. The bracelet was worn and faded, but one detail stood out immediately. Discharge, mother only. No baby's name, no matching infant bracelet. Detective Pike carefully slid both items into evidence bags. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "No," I answered. "It explains one thing." He looked at me. "But it creates 10 more." By late afternoon, we were driving to Reno. The hospital had located archived records from 16 years earlier. Most of the paper files had been digitized years ago, but maternity records from that period were stored in a secure warehouse outside the city. The drive took almost 3 hours. Nobody spoke much. Sophie slept with her head against the passenger window. I watched miles of dry hills pass outside while one question repeated in my mind. If Natalie believed her daughter had died, why hide the birth certificate? Why hide the photograph? Why spend 16 years secretly visiting her? None of it fit. At 5:40 that evening, we met Evelyn Ross. She had been a maternity nurse before retiring 8 years earlier. When Detective Pike showed her Marianne Vale's photograph, Evelyn didn't hesitate. "I remember her." "You do?" "Marianne was one of the kindest nurses we had." She frowned. "Until that baby disappeared." Every muscle in my body tightened. "What baby?" Evelyn looked at me. "You don't know?" Detective Pike shook his head. "We're still putting things together." The old nurse folded her hands. "There was an investigation. A newborn girl disappeared from the nursery." "When?" 16 years ago." The room became perfectly still. Evelyn continued. "The baby belonged to a young mother named Natalie." I felt Sophie grab my arm. The hospital believed someone had taken the child during the night. There were security failures, broken cameras, doors left unlocked. The police searched for weeks. They never found her. I looked at Pike. "This isn't what the note says." "No, it isn't." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Because that isn't what Natalie was told." "What do you mean?" The nurse looked genuinely upset. "They never let her see the investigation." Hospital administrators were terrified. They told Natalie the baby suffered complications shortly after birth. They said she passed away. I couldn't breathe. They lied to her? They believed it was kinder than admitting someone had stolen her child. Sophie whispered, "Oh my God." But Evelyn wasn't finished. Only 4 people knew the truth. The hospital director, the lead detective, Marianne, and Natalie's mother. The drive back to Sacramento felt different. Not because we had answers, because every answer made the story worse. Natalie hadn't hidden a child because she wanted another family. She had hidden the truth because someone convinced her there had never been a child to find. Someone had stolen 16 years of her life. At 8:15, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. This time I answered immediately. "Natalie?" Heavy breathing. Then, "No." It was Lila. "I know who you are now," I said. Silence. "I've known for 2 days," she whispered. "Knew what?" "That you're my mother's husband." My heart stopped. "Did Mom tell you?" "No. Marianne did." The name hit me like ice. "Marianne raised you?" A long pause. "Yes." "Was she your mother?" "No." The answer came instantly. "She never lied about that." I closed my eyes. What happened 16 years ago? Lila began crying softly. Not loud, not dramatic. The quiet crying of someone who had carried the same story for years. "Marianne told me she was working that night. She heard 2 women arguing outside your mom's room. One of them wanted the baby gone. The other kept saying, 'She'll ruin her entire life if she keeps it.'" I immediately thought of Carol, Natalie's mother. Lila continued. Marianne said when she came back, the baby was gone, and everyone blamed each other. I interrupted. Marianne took you? No. She found me. What? The detective missed something. There was another exit. The woman who took me panicked. She left me in the employee parking garage. I stared ahead through the windshield. Marianne hadn't kidnapped Lila. She had rescued her. Lila kept talking. Marianne tried giving me back. But nobody believed her. She already had disciplinary complaints. They thought she invented the story. So she ran. Why? Because the people who actually took me started looking for her. Detective Pike slowly pulled the car onto the shoulder. He turned toward me. Put her on speaker. I did. Lila. Who wanted you? Silence. Then, I don't know. But Marianne always said, the people weren't trying to steal a baby. They were trying to hide one. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Hide one, not steal one. Hide one. The sentence changed everything, because babies are stolen, secrets are hidden. Lila, Pike asked carefully, did Marianne ever tell you who your father was? Another long silence. Finally, no. But she told me something stranger. What? She said, my father spent years looking for me. I frowned. That's impossible. I know. She said he never knew I was born. Every hair on my arm stood up. An hour later, we reached home. There was a police cruiser outside. Another detective waited on my porch. She introduced herself as Julia Mercer from the State Cold Case Unit. She didn't waste time. We reopened the infant abduction investigation this morning. Why? She looked directly at Detective Pike. Because the DNA results just came back. I felt my stomach tighten. What DNA? The blood found inside Natalie's abandoned car. I assumed it belonged to Marianne. Julia shook her head. It did. But there was someone else's. She opened a folder. The second DNA sample belongs to... She looked at me. Your mother-in-law. Carol. Dead for 3 years. Impossible. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because my brain refused to process it. That's impossible. Julia nodded. We thought so too. Then she placed another photograph on the kitchen table. Security footage. Old. Grainy. Taken 16 years earlier. It showed the maternity hallway. A woman pushing an empty wheelchair. Another woman walking beside her. The timestamp matched the night Lila disappeared. The first woman was Marianne. The second was Carol. Not arguing. Not chasing anyone. Helping. My hands began shaking. Evelyn had been wrong. Marianne hadn't rescued Lila after the kidnapping. She had been with Carol from the very beginning. The nurse, my mother-in-law, the missing baby, all together. Detective Pike looked at Julia. Then why did Marianne spend 16 years raising the child? Julia slowly closed the folder. Because Carol died before she could finish what she'd started. I stared at the grainy image. For 2 days, I believed my wife had betrayed me. Now I was beginning to understand something much worse. Natalie hadn't been living a double life. She had spent 16 years trapped inside someone else's. I spent 16 years blaming my wife for a lie she never created. That realization stayed with me long after everyone else stopped talking. The kitchen had gone completely silent. Detective Mercer stared at the old security photograph. Detective Pike kept comparing it to the timeline spread across the table. Sophie stood beside the refrigerator, holding the chipped Lake Tahoe mug Natalie had forgotten the night she disappeared. No one wanted to be the first person to admit what the evidence now suggested. It wasn't Natalie who had built the secret. It was Carol, my mother-in-law, the woman who had smiled at our wedding, the woman who held Sophie's hand when she was born, the woman who had looked me in the eye for 17 years while hiding another granddaughter from both of us. 2 days later, another piece finally fell into place. Marianne had left a safety deposit box with instructions that it could only be opened if she died. Since she had died in the crash, the bank released it to investigators. Inside were only 4 things: a flash drive, a small stack of photographs, a sealed letter addressed to Natalie, and a worn leather notebook. The notebook changed everything. It wasn't a diary. It was a timeline. Every meeting, every address, every school, every doctor, every birthday. Marianne had documented Lila's entire life from the day she found her until the week she died. Not because she wanted to keep Natalie away, because she had been terrified someone else would find Lila first. According to her notes, Carol visited her only once after the night at the hospital. She offered Marianne $50,000, not to return the baby, to disappear with her. When Marianne refused, Carol threatened to accuse her of kidnapping. Marianne ran. She changed names 3 times, moved through Nevada, Utah, Idaho, then finally California. She never stayed anywhere longer than 3 years. Lila thought they moved because Marianne liked fresh starts. The truth was much darker. She was hiding. Near the end of the notebook, 1 page had been folded over several times. It was dated 8 months earlier. The handwriting was shaky. Natalie found us today. I felt my throat tighten. The next lines explained everything. Natalie had hired a private investigator after Carol died. While sorting through her mother's storage unit, she found old hospital documents hidden inside a sewing machine. The documents proved there had never been a death certificate for her baby, only an internal incident report. She spent almost 3 years quietly searching. She never told me. Not because she didn't trust me, because she was terrified of losing Lila again if the wrong people found out. Marianne wrote, "She cried for almost an hour. She kept saying, 'I thought she died because I wasn't strong enough.' I couldn't read the next page without stopping. It described their first meeting. Lila had been 15. Natalie walked into the apartment carrying a paper grocery bag. Neither of them spoke. They simply stood there looking at each other. Then Lila asked one question. 'Did you really want me?' Marianne wrote that Natalie collapsed before she could answer. Detective Pike closed the notebook. So why disappear now? Mercer opened the sealed letter. It wasn't written for investigators. It was written for Natalie. Natalie, if you're reading this, I failed. Someone finally found us. Everyone looked at each other. Marianne continued. The woman who came to the apartment wasn't after Lila. She was looking for the papers Carol stole from the hospital. Pike frowned. What papers? Mercer searched the notebook again. There, tucked inside the back cover, was a thin envelope. Inside, original hospital reports, interview transcripts, security failures, staff statements, and one signed confession. Carol Hale. 16 years earlier. The confession explained why everything happened. Carol believed Natalie would destroy her future by raising a baby alone. The baby's father had disappeared before the birth. Carol arranged for a family friend to take the newborn away. The plan failed almost immediately. The frightened woman abandoned the baby in the employee parking garage. Marianne found her. Instead of calling security, Marianne panicked. She knew nobody would believe the truth. By the time she returned, Carol had already convinced hospital administrators that the baby had died during emergency treatment. The hospital covered up the kidnapping to avoid public scandal. Marianne disappeared with Lila because she believed the people responsible would simply try again. One terrible decision created 16 years of worse ones. "But who killed Marianne?" Sophie asked. Mercer looked toward the window. No one. We all stared at her. The crash wasn't intentional. She explained that Marianne had been driving Natalie to a safe location after someone began asking questions about Carol's old records. Natalie had switched cars with Marianne at the last minute because Marianne thought anyone following them would recognize Natalie. Marianne put on Natalie's ring, carried her wallet, drove away first. A truck crossed the center line 22 minutes later. There was no conspiracy, no assassin, no planned murder. Just a terrible accident that happened because two women were trying to protect the same girl. 3 days later, I saw Natalie again. Not in a hospital, not in an interrogation room. She was sitting beside a quiet lake outside Auburn. Lila sat next to her. Neither of them noticed me at first. Natalie was showing Lila how to skip stones across the water. She laughed when Lila's first attempt dropped straight into the lake. It was the first time I had heard her laugh in almost a week. She looked older, not physically, emotionally, like someone who had finally stopped carrying something too heavy to survive. When she saw me, she stood slowly. "I'm sorry." I walked toward her. "For what?" "For not telling you." I looked at Lila, then back at Natalie. "You were protecting your daughter. I should have trusted you." "Yes." She nodded. "I know." We stood there for several seconds. Finally, I asked the question that had haunted me since the beginning. "Why didn't you tell me after you found her?" Natalie looked at the water. "I wanted to." She smiled sadly. "But every time I looked at you, I imagined having to explain 16 years. I didn't know where to begin. I understood. That didn't erase the hurt, but understanding and forgiveness are different things. The divorce papers were never filed. Not because everything magically became normal. It didn't. Trust takes much longer to rebuild than to lose. Natalie moved into the guest room for almost 6 months. We started counseling. Not because a therapist could erase 17 years. Because we wanted to stop letting Carol decide the rest of our lives. Lila never tried to replace Sophie. Sophie never resented Lila. The first dinner they shared was awkward. The second was quieter. By Thanksgiving, they were teasing each other like sisters who had simply missed too many birthdays. Some things cannot be recovered. Childhood, 16 years, first steps, school plays, birthday cakes. Those moments were gone forever. But something else remained. Choice. Natalie chose to stop hiding. Lila chose to trust the woman who had never stopped looking for her. Sophie chose to make room in her life for a sister she never knew existed. And I chose something I once believed impossible. I chose to believe that one terrible secret did not have to become the ending of every story. 1 year later, we sold the house where every room reminded us of lies we didn't create. We bought a smaller place near the lake. Nothing fancy, just enough room for all 4 of us to fit around one kitchen table. On moving day, Sophie unpacked the dishes. Lila found the old chipped Lake Tahoe mug. She held it up. "Whose is this?" Natalie smiled. "His." Lila handed it to me. "You should keep it." I wrapped both hands around the mug. The same mug Natalie had used on the morning everyone believed she died. The same mug I had stared at while believing my marriage was built on deception. Now it meant something different. Not betrayal. Survival. Some evenings, all 4 of us sit on the back porch and watch the sun disappear behind the trees. Sometimes nobody speaks. Nobody has to. Because after 17 years of lies, cover-ups, missing daughters, and borrowed identities, the greatest gift we were given wasn't the truth. It was finally having nothing left to hide.